Hello, welcome to Holding Ground, a show that tackles topics in mental health and psychotherapy for individuals, couples, children, and families. Our goal is to promote well-being by normalizing mental health challenges. I'm your host, Laura Richer, a psychotherapist and the founder of Anchor Light Therapy Collective in Seattle, Washington. For more tips and resources on mental health, visit anchorlighttherapy.com or follow us on socials at Anchor Light Therapy. Welcome to Holding Ground, the podcast that brings you a little bit of everything in the realm of psychotherapy and mental health. My name is Laura Richer. I'm the founder of Anchor Light Therapy Collective in Seattle, Washington. And today we have a great show for you. We're going to take a deep dive into a transformative approach to couples therapy called emotionally focused therapy, or EFT. Today, joining me is Anchor Light's own skilled couples therapist, Aiden Maris. Hi, Aiden.
Hi, Laura.
Thanks for joining me today as we talk about EFT and how it helps couples build healthier relationships.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. So let's just start with the basics. Emotionally focused therapy is a therapy that was developed by Dr. Sue Johnson, and the root of it is in attachment theory. It is designed to address stress and disconnection in relationships. So here is what Sue Johnson has to say about relationships. To achieve a lasting, loving bond, we have to be able to tune into our deepest needs and longings and translate them into clear signals that help our lovers respond to us. We have to be able to accept love and to reciprocate. So, Aiden, why might someone seek out this type of therapy?
Yeah, I think, the quote that Sue Johnson has really kind of highlights why people come in for couples therapy. There's this deep longing, there's this break in connection, there's this desire to get closer or to reconnect in some way that a couple maybe hasn't experienced in a while or feels really disconnected. So they're usually looking for something more in depth. There's certain couples therapy techniques like Gottman that we practice here that gives a lot of tools and a lot of structure. EFT, they're very similar in that way, but EFT focuses more on the live experience of emotion that happens in the room. So sometimes when a couple is coming in, they're feeling really disconnected, they're not getting along, they're not communicating, or the way they're communicating is actually damaging and harmful, which we'll go into. But it's really, they're looking for something more. They're looking to understand each other and their partner more. So EFT, it does a beautiful job of going deeper.
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so, as you mentioned, a lot of times people are coming to us when they're distressed in their relationship and they are finding themselves in some negative cycles, which is something that we talk about a lot in EFT.
Yeah.
So what would be some examples of the negative cycle a couple might get into that might prompt them to want to do therapy?
Yeah, I think, negative cycles are really common. And we're going to find, there's going to be like about 3 that we commonly see. But the most common one is going to be that criticism kind of defense cycle. So this is going to be a cycle that looks like one person being overtly critical or really direct. They might be using some really intense language, like they're putting their partner down or they're complaining a lot. And the other person is responding from a more defensive stance. So they might be ignoring or being passive aggressive, or is responding just as intensely but in a more defensive stance. So they're not really hearing the deeper emotions that the criticizing partner has. And the trouble with that is the criticizing partner, let's call them, we'll use the term like anxious, which we'll get into more, is being more aware of what's not going right in the relationship, and they're being very vocal about it. And what we try to do is kind of validate that function of why they're criticizing. Them saying, of course you're criticizing. Your partner isn't seeing what you need them to see. You care so much. Like, oh my God, this is must feel so lonely or isolated to be in the spot. And we're trying to understand for the defensive partner, the avoidant partner, we'll call them, why they're pulling away. Why, when their partner gets big and intense, they feel the need. They can't go to them. So we want to validate that and say, of course you're pulling away when the partner looks so, intense. You feel like you can't get it right. You feel like you're just messing up. You're not good enough. And that can become this really dangerous, like unproductive cycle.
Yes. Yeah. That leads to escalating conflict. And so we're really trying to help them make sense of their experience, because it does make sense. And even though their approach might be ineffective, they're both trying to have their emotional needs met. They're just missing each other.
Exactly.
So we have this kind of pursue withdrawal cycle and that's probably the most common thing that we see in couples therapy is one partner might be more critical. They're trying to pull their partner in. The other person is overwhelmed by that. And so they might withdraw, which escalates things even more. So what are some other examples that you see with couples?
Yeah, another one is, it's less common, but we sometimes see withdraw. And that one is going to be a lot more lower conflict. So, you got two people who are more cautious of what they're going to say, or they're more hesitant. They don't engage in the kind of intensity of conflict that a pursue withdrawal couple might do. And a lot of times they're feeling, like we're kind of saying, like hesitant to bring things up. They might not know how, they might not have the language, or, something in their history has told them when they do bring up issues, it doesn't go over well. And the other person is kind of doing the same exact thing. So there's a low level of or a hum of disconnection. And, they might present very connected, or they might present very like happy or seeming like everything's okay. But the more we kind of dig and try to explore, the more is going to come to light.
Yes.
And you're going to find that they're very scared, I think, a lot of times to talk about the hard things and the hard moments.
Yeah. And this is going to be a couple that usually will say, well, we don't really fight about anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which
is not always the goal, because sometimes not fighting about anything means you're not talking about anything, and you're just avoiding the issues.
They've got a pattern that's normalize keeping everything okay, or level as okay as it can be, or they may have gotten a message from their parents or their environment like fighting isn't the best thing. They could have seen their parents get really big and explosive and just realized that leads to more hurt and disconnection. But really, they might come in with thinking, oh, it's bad if we fight, or there must be something really wrong. So the reason we see them as less common is because of that very thing. They might be feeling, walking around in the relationship like everything's like totally fine, or like okay, or the issues they're not as big as we think they are. So we're more likely to see the pursue withdraw, because often, the withdrawal can be the initiator for therapy too, but it's more often, I think, you can let me know if I'm off here, that the pursuer is going to be like, we need to go to therapy.
Oh, definitely. It's going to be most often the pursuer. In fact, maybe we can never say always, but that's the person that's recognizing that there's an issue. The person who's more avoidant wants to avoid the issue, so they're not necessarily, they're going to feel like therapy is going to make things worse because we're going to have to sit and talk about problems. So they're probably going to be less likely to want to do therapy. And I think, the avoid couple, that they're not having a lot of conflict, but they're also not talking about anything.
Right.
We're going to see them when somebody has a lot of resentment, where they're maybe ready to kind of check out of the relationship. They haven't talked about anything for so long that they feel so disconnected from their partner. And that's when we might see them more often in therapy.
Absolutely.
And then we have one more presentation that I think I don't see too often. I don't know about you, but what's the...
I think, the third one is attack, or pursue kind of deal. But I'm, as you kind of were saying, I don't see it too much. So I think we have to give it more, it does exist. You get two people who are anxiously attached together, just like you have two people who are avoidantly attached can be together. But it's going to be more intense. It's going to be that they're more kind of explicit in their fighting. They're going to be more, as soon as someone starts attacking, the other person's going to respond with attack as well. And they're just really not hearing each other. That's happening in, pretty much any cycle of conflict. But I think you got two people who are maybe more taking that criticism approach, is they just end up hurting each other. And it looks big. It looks like, we spend a lot of time probably de-escalating that couple. But the value with, I think, two people who are attacking or come in with that more anxious thing is they both are aware of what the problems are. Like you were saying, the anxious person's gonna be like, they both get it. They both get that there's something wrong. And they might have a better chance there of maybe understanding what they're fighting for. Whereas an anxious avoidant couple, the avoidant person might not understand the function of the fight. And the anxious person says, well, we need to fight in order to talk about the hard things. But the way we're going about it just isn't working.
And that's what I think we don't see the really escalated couple that just kind of both, yell and it's explosive is, and that can be very harmful. And I don't recommend this as a strategy in a relationship. Right. However, they get it all out.
They do.
Aware of what the issues are.
They're not boring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to recap here, we have the negative cycles that we see that come into the couples therapy are going to be the pursue withdrawal, where one partner is pursuing connection by maybe being critical, bringing conflict up. That causes their partner to pull away from them, which further increases their anxiety. Exactly. Then we have the two withdrawn partners, which are both avoiding conflict. And sometimes there's a lot of resentment building up under the surface there. And then we have the partners that just let it all out. There might be more of an anxious attachment style there. And they're just they can have really escalated conflict. It can be hard to repair. They might say things they don't mean, but they are addressing the issues sometimes aggressively. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And so all of this is rooted in attachment styles. So we talked about some of these different presentations, but the way that you connect in relationship and the way that you perceive relationship has a lot to do with how you're going to create different dynamics in your relationship. Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about the different attachment styles.
Yeah, so there's the anxious. We'll just start with the anxious. That's top of mind. An anxiously attached person, usually from their upbringing, their parents or whoever did the main caregiving, hasn't been, they've been responding to them somewhat, but it usually comes from a place that doesn't feel like enough. So they're going to more kind of revolve around like they were told their emotions maybe were too big or too much, or the person, their parents who were on the other end of their emotions and trying to soothe them couldn't or didn't have the skills. So they were left to kind of just flail a little bit. So they're going to kind of walk around with emotions of like, where the feeling is that like, I'm going to be abandoned. I'm going to be, left alone if I show my emotions, or my emotions get too big. Someone can't hold this for me. So they're kind of searching for danger a lot of times in relationships. They're looking for some kind of comfort, some kind of stability. And it's often not from the self, it's from somebody. It's by being in relation and connection, which, we should say, that's absolutely the goal of a lot of, I think, humanity is, and relationships is finding connection.
Yes.
So they're not doing it with bad intention. They're doing it because they feel this really intense longing to connect and to feel seen and to finally find someone who feels like their emotions aren't too much, not enough. So when they try to pursue, they might look clingy. They might look like they're always needing reassurance. They might be critical. They might be very aware of where problems are, even if everything feels like fine. Their system, their body, they might be saying, but be careful, danger is always around the next corner. Yeah. So they're hyper vigilant, which is why they're the ones bringing problems.
Yes.
Yeah.
And driven by the fear of abandonment, that there's a lot of insecurity. I'm going to be left. I'm going to be abandoned. I'm not lovable.
Yeah. And that's what we're going for. We should say in EFT is for the anxious person to say that, to get in touch with that deep. That's an incredibly painful, vulnerable place for them. So the closer they can get to that and name it and express it, the more likely they have a better chance of actually being heard. Yeah. Because the critical defense poking doesn't work. It pushes the other partner away.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So we have anxious attachment. Yes. So they could be critical. They have, they could be perceived as needy. They have a deep fear of abandonment and often are perceived as like they can't get enough connection. They're desperately craving it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And also I want to point out that this is a spectrum, right? So some people can be extremely anxious. Some people can lean just a little bit into anxiety. So this can present in a lot of different ways. Absolutely. So we are going to take a quick break. Okay. But when we come back, we're going to discuss the other attachment styles. All right. Well, welcome back to Holding Ground, where we're discussing emotionally focused therapy today with Ada Maris. And we were just touching on attachment styles. So anxious attachment is the first one that we covered. And then what is the next most common attachment style?
That one's going to be avoidant. Okay. So it's, like you were saying, it's, I appreciate you mentioned that this is the spectrum. And so the avoidant people are going to be more hesitant to bring up what's going on in they've got the message that showing emotions is a sign of weakness. It doesn't have a function. They're told a lot of the times to maybe just get over it, or they're somehow less than for feeling or something like that. So they have deep emotions, just like everybody does. Everybody has this range of emotion. Their messaging around emotion and confronting issues has been, it's best to keep it to yourself, because if you do, their experience has told them people are going to leave them or move away. So it's, whenever we think about this and talk about this, it's always good to remind ourselves, you'll hear the similarities where, like anxious people or anxiously attached folks are trying to, they've got a fear of abandonment and, I'm going to be alone. Avoidant people's is, I'm not good enough. It's this deep feeling of like, whatever I do is going to be criticized or not enough. Yeah. So they've kind of taken this view of the world as saying, well, the world can't really be trusted. I'm the only one that can trust. So I have to do everything on my own.
Yeah.
So they look like on the surface, when you first meet them, they present as very like secure almost, or independent, or have this way of just saying, I know what I need to do for myself. I got it, very independent. And that, I think, we'll kind of talk more about the culture part of this, but that's often really validated.
Yes.
I think for a lot of people. Yeah.
Very celebrated, especially in American culture, to be very self-reliant, independent.
Absolutely.
And so this can be very attractive to people initially. It can feel like a presentation of a lot of confidence. And
and for the anxious person, that's kind of what draws them in.
Yes.
Is saying, wow, this person's really got it together.
Yes.
I can learn something from them.
Yeah.
And the avoidant person says, wow, this person's really available. And
really available and affectionate and
tells me what they're thinking and feeling.
Yes. And I think an important part, too, to talk about with avoidance as well is while an anxious person might feel they'll have a nervous system reaction to the idea that their partner is withdrawing from them, which increases their anxiety and they respond to that.
Yeah.
An avoidant person is overwhelmed by heightened emotion, which shuts them down.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when we see that cycle go on between the anxious partner and the avoidant partner, the avoidant person is going away not because the anxious person's, their strategy of trying to get heard makes them feel like they are back in that place where they're getting attacked or what they're doing isn't right.
Yeah.
So they're moving away to actually self-soothe and to protect themselves. That very move, though, looks like to the anxious person like they're getting abandoned.
Yes.
So boom, right there you got their worst fear is getting triggered in the other. I can't get it right and you're going to leave me. And then that's where intensity rises. Once people are in that place, this is not conscious a lot of the time, full disclosure. That's why we work so hard on helping people get and say, oh, right, when I move away, I'm just scared and don't want to disappoint you. Oh, and when I get big and intense, I'm actually really afraid of losing you.
Yes.
And helping people get to some version of that.
Yes. Yeah. Making sense of their experience.
Exactly.
So finally, we have this, sometimes what we think of as like this mythical creature that has a secure attachment. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. It's the secure attached folks, I'll say, this is pretty much, I've read some stuff that says, attachment styles there, everybody's got a little bit of everything like you're saying on the spectrum. But the secure folks kind of are like in this nice middle, I think, or when they have a secure attachment, they still feel all the range of emotions, of course, and they still feel insecurity and jealousy and irritation and anxiety. They still have these emotions, what we call secondary emotions that anxious and avoidant people have. They just are maybe a little bit quicker to recognize what's going on. And they're also able to self-soothe better. So when they're hurt, they can maybe regulate their nervous system a little bit more efficiently or quicker, or however you want to put it, than an anxiously avoidant person has. They also have the message that saying how you feel and speaking from an I place of hurt is vulnerable, and that's okay. There's a lot of normalizing that they've had experience. They've probably had at least one or two parents or somebody in their world saying, you're sad, that's okay. You're angry, that's okay. Or shown that that's important and that's necessary for you to get deeper in connections. They probably had the ability and experience of showing those vulnerable emotions to somebody and have them not pull away, but actually lean in closer. So they've experienced what it's like to be emotional, and that leads to more connection. Yeah. And that's an experience anxious and avoidant people haven't had as much.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they have less fear of abandonment, less fear of being overwhelmed in relationship.
Yeah.
they're also regular human beings. And so if their partner's
Mhm.
pulling away from them, they may feel anxious, or if
Yeah.
their partner's coming at them very aggressively, they
Yep.
could withdraw and feel a little avoidant,
Absolutely.
but they're less likely to have those responses in a way that might be really harmful or destructive or dysregulate them in the same way.
They might say,
Yeah.
if they're starting to feel a little bit anxious, they might say, I'm feeling a little bit anxious. I need some reassurance. Can you reassure me? But if they're feeling avoidant, they may say, I'm feeling actually like I'm pulling away. I don't want to do that because I know it's going to freak you out.
Yeah.
So I'm scared to kind of say how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And they might be more vulnerable there.
Yeah. So they might make a little more sense on their own of their own experience of what is happening.
Yeah.
And for the rest of us who need some help with that, EFT can help. And therapy can help you make sense of that experience and what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately, human beings need connection. The idea that we are codependent or we're too needy is kind of, it's not accurate.
No, it's not accurate. It's also, I think it's an exaggerated form, like codependency, like you're saying, kind of gets a bad rap, where it feels like, oh, we shouldn't be too codependent. I'm sure you hear this from clients.
Yes.
Hear this. Like, I'm afraid we have a codependency issue.
Yeah.
And I try to reframe that and say, well, it sounds like you two are really aware of your desire to connect, or the importance that each other has in your life. And when you feel that absence, or you feel like maybe it's getting too dependent, your system is telling you either move away or move closer or do something. It feels unsettling.
Yeah.
Their absence feels like a big, big absence, or their closeness feels threatening. So I think that's where we can kind of come in and do some more lines.
Yeah. So codependent, maybe, you think of somebody maybe in addiction, like in a situation of addiction, where they're completely consumed by the other person's experience and they can't live their own life.
Yeah.
That is unhealthy. Yeah. But interdependence, where we need connection with our partners, is just human.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about how how gender impacts some of these dynamics.
Yeah, and this is a one where I think everything I'm going to say, I'm taking from, being a white presenting male, in the US. So, and I see couples that are heterosexual, that are queer, same sex, identifying multiply in different ways. But I think the bread and butter, is often that at least I see here is male and female dyads. And there can be this idea that women present in this more anxiously attached way, and men are kind of more conditioned to be avoidant. And the reason I use the word condition is because of not only is your system that you grew up in very isolating, but as soon as you step out into the world, you start to experience other people, you have different connections and relationships. And then with that comes these cultural, social expectations. Yeah. And for men, it sometimes is viewed as, or can be definitely emphasized to not show emotion because that leads to weakness or vulnerability. And they've experienced maybe showing emotion has gotten them rejected in some way or seen as weak or less than. So they're going to be probably more in that camp of avoidance, which definitely emphasizes doing things on your own.
Right.
And says that conflict, you just got to smooth it out and fix it. So what I hear from a lot of men in my heterosexual couples is they just want to fix it. And that can...
Your partners love that.
They love it. Always fix things. Yeah. And and I always, with avoidant men, I'm always saying, we're not here for right and wrong. You probably got a really great idea. And I'm really seeing that you so much want to move them out of your discomfort. That seeing your partner anxious or stressed or sad is heartbreaking for you. And the only way you know how to help them is by to fix it.
Yeah.
And when you try to fix it, it looks like for her or for them, you're not hearing them.
Yeah.
It's pushing them further away. They don't feel validated. So of course you're getting frustrated right now because your way of trying to help them isn't working. It's not working so good. So I want to help you help them. Right. So that's kind of more how I'm trying to understand what's going on for them.
Right.
And then I think on the other hand of that, where women can fall into that more anxious role, is being conditioned more to ask for help or to that it's okay to, ask for help in a way, or to be more knowing that other people can help you or feeling more attached. But then also there can be a fear of being left for being or seen as perceived as too emotional or the other end of it or too much or all these kinds of things that are equally as damaging. and can be incredibly validating to feel like, wow, my emotions, such as they are, my humanness is not tolerated.
Right.
I'm pissed now. I'm angry. I want to tell you, you need to hear me and understand me. So of course I'm going to get louder or big. But because I think we're talking about gender, it can look like going for an anxiously attached woman to be more quiet too, or the man to be loud and big, even though they're avoided. So I think that's where we have to be mindful of how gender affects things. Yeah. And as therapists, we can't walk in with this basic assumption that these people are going to present how we think they're going to present.
Yes.
Everybody presents differently.
Yes. Yeah. So we are going to take another quick break. And when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation about who EFT is for.
Cool.
So stay tuned. Welcome back. I am here with couples therapist Aiden Maris, and we are talking about emotionally focused therapy. And so, Aiden, tell me a little bit about how neurobiology plays a role in attachment.
Yeah, that's a really important one that, is always good to touch on, I think, in the beginning of sessions where we do a little like psychoeducation. A lot of is going on in these negative interaction cycles, or a couple gets in a cycle, is they're getting triggered. And when we say trigger, that's from a deep evolutionary biological place. So they're in some state of arousal, so fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and they're reacting from that place. So an anxious person is going to be pretty much more in a fight place. They're fighting to get connected. And that's coming from, this feeling that if we're left out or isolated from other people, we don't have that connection. We need to fight to get back in. They can, of course, fawn or freeze or do other kinds of things. That's all a different mode and gets a different kind of need met. Avoidant people might be in that more freeze or flight place where they're moving away from danger. So again, this is all just emphasizing that these are ways of keeping ourselves safe, and that in these kind of neurological responses, or these automatic responses, as we say, why that's important to talk about and to let our clients know, or let people know listening, is like these moves to avoid or attack are often subconscious and just happen.
Yeah.
And that, why I say that in the beginning for folks or for couples, is to just normalize that, you're going to get triggered by your partner. We're not here to stop triggering each other. You're just going to hit landmines. You're going to hit these points. You're going to hit these painful spots. The thing I've been talking about lately with clients is like the porcupine or hedgehog theory, that, you need to, bundle together to get closer. But by doing so, you stick out your quills and poke.
Yeah.
Hurts people. So it's inevitable. We need to connect and be warm, but by doing so, we're going to brush up against people's wounds. So that's an unconscious process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing in therapy, is we're taking these triggers, these unconscious responses, things that might not even make sense to the client. And with emotionally focused therapy, we're really helping them make sense of their behavior and their responses. Yeah. Which is very normal, that we have responses, we have triggers, we respond in ways sometimes we go, why did I even do that?
Yeah.
What caused me to be so upset in that moment? And it's like you said, it's a nervous system response. It's our survival mechanism kicking in, saying, you are not safe here. You need to fight or flee.
Exactly. Yeah. Get back to connection, get back to safety.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about different presentations of anxious attachment and avoidant attachment. And these are really ways that when we have attachment wounds, they're ways that we respond to try to stay safe. Yeah. But these strategies can be really ineffective.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what we're unpacking in therapy.
Yeah.
And so what might that look like for some, like, for example, for an anxious partner? What are some of the ineffective strategies that they might use to have their emotional needs met?
Yeah. Like we were saying, criticism is a big one. So that might look like pointing out what's wrong in the relationship, pointing out things they don't like about their partner. If it's more of an anxious kind of insecure place, it might be more asking for more, to like a lot of calling, texting, seeking reassurance, not willing to let things go a lot of the time. And that's all ways of, again, trying to bring the person closer to them. They, in their mind, it looks, or their system from that response, it seems like the most logical thing to do. Well, if I contact them more, they'll see how much I need them, or how much I want them.
Yeah.
And they'll get it, and they'll come to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's probably worked for them at some point in the past, is what we always try to remind people, is saying, well, you're doing this because your story has told you, if you do this, you'll get what you want. And it sometimes does work. I think that's what's important is this is not like this always fails kind of move, but in a cycle, it often does.
Yeah.
Where, criticizing can have the avoidant partner relent, but they're not relenting in a way that feels like clean. They're left feeling like hurt or not good enough or resentful.
So the issue is not resolved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the anxious person kind of feels that. Like, oh, you're only saying this because I wanted you to.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel good.
Yeah. So it can meet the need, but not in a way that resolves the issue. And then also, I think it can be an attempt to regulate the nervous system. So somebody feels like, I'm just going to blow this situation up. I'm going to send a 14-page text of all my grievances, break up with this person, and that somehow will relieve my anxiety.
Yeah. And it does. You're right. I think, you said at one point, it does. It's a relief.
Yeah.
And it's, oh God, I just got to get this out.
Yes.
And then the damage is done. And they're, kind of not there what they need.
Yes. Yeah. And there's shame or regret, and then their need ultimately was not met. Yeah. And they're left feeling abandoned, which was what they feared the most in the first place. Yeah. What about for our avoidant folks? What are their ineffective strategies?
The pulling away, the shutting down, the saying, well, let's talk about this later, passive aggressiveness, defensiveness, saying you're just making too much of a big deal out of this, or exaggerate, they might actually start, and that can look intense too. It's not this quiet thing. They might just, you see this with couples, and they might just go really quiet and just kind of like sit there shaking their head. So they're listening, but they're like internally not, responding to what the partner is kind of really. They're responding to what they're saying in this really indirect way sometimes, or they might start to get really into the weeds and say, "Well, that's not what I said," and you're remembering that wrong. And they start to dismiss as a way of saying, if you see that I'm wrong somehow, that confirms this deep, dark belief that I have that I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
So they're trying to push back against what their partner is trying to do to, connect, but they're feeling hurt. They're not feeling understood. So they're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you think these two gravitate towards each other? The anxious person and the avoidant person always seem to find their way to each other.
It's a question that I ask myself all the time, and it's it's
very common.
It's so common, and I think there's a couple ways to answer it, but I think the one that I think you and I have talked about, and I like a lot, is that the anxious person sees in the avoidant person some level of security. There's some level of calm, stableness. They got everything figured out. They're independent. They're available in the beginning. They're probably great listeners, for the avoidant person, because the anxious person might be, they're in their mind or their head and they're talking. The avoidant person can kind of sit there and listen. Yeah. And for the avoidant person, the anxious person looks available, looks like you were saying, there's a lot of expression of like affection and connection and a desire to connect. And for the avoidant person, that's like, man, this person, is maybe has a shot at understanding me because they're wanting to be with me, and that makes me feel good enough.
Yeah.
And so, and that's why we always kind of say in the beginning, these cycles aren't really happening so much. You start to notice them later. That's why, couples are coming in X amount of years into the relationship. They're not coming in after 6 months of dating, that they've either broken up or they're in the honeymoon stage, or things are generally fine, or they're not thinking, oh, this is a really big issue. Yeah. There needs to be a certain level of trust and connection and deep, deep intimacy to get people to the point of having these more intense cycles to readily identify as something. You need time to get to this place.
Yeah. And then when they are in that place, I think often a common theme is that they have each validated each other's fear. The anxious person's fear is that I'm going to be abandoned, and the avoidant person is I'm going to be overwhelmed. And so an anxious partner will definitely overwhelm an avoidant person, and the avoidance person's withdrawal will definitely leave the anxious person feeling emotionally abandoned.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is a common dynamic, and we call this the anxious avoidant trap. Because once the cycle starts happening, it's like in a second, somebody can say something and we are off and running in the way, however the couple does this. Yeah. So just tell me a little bit about that cycle in more detail, or how we might unpack that in therapy.
Yeah, I think it becomes more this closeness that we're seeking becomes almost the most important thing in the room, and also simultaneously the most like scary thing, or the thing that they're most afraid of losing.
Yeah.
So it becomes, I mean, you're watching two people fight for connection, and I say fight because like that's what they're doing. They're trying desperately to get to safety or connection.
Yeah.
So what you're saying more specifically, what we're going to see more of like this. It can start with an anxious person. It can start with an avoidant person. Sometimes we have couples walk in and they're like, we just fought all the way over here. And, he did the thing where he made a comment about my driving. And it was so triggering to me because when he says I'm driving too fast, I just hear, him completely not understanding me. And I hear him just completely getting on my case. And it feels like I'm so trapped. I'm so lost. I can't get it right. And then, the person who made the comment about the driving is going to be like, well, I'm just trying to help you here. I'm just trying to point out, I'm just trying to do the right thing here. Like, you're driving too fast down the road. I wish you would see that that's scaring me.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a really cool, vulnerable move for them to do it in the first 10 minutes, but that's not going to happen. It's going to do a lot of you, noticing there. I'm not saying a lot of I'm saying a lot of you did this. I'm just trying to help you. I'm not doing anything wrong. So they're now entering this defensive stance.
Yeah.
And then the other person is going to say, well, now I just feel like you're coming at me and my character. And I hate when you do this.
Yeah.
And you always do this. You always comment on this one thing. It's like, I can't get it right with you. It feels like just no matter how hard I try, you just can't see, well, I was driving fast because I cared about getting us there on time. And you don't see that.
Yeah.
And then, then it kind of just keeps going back. I could go all day.
Yeah.
Imagining what people are going to say to each other.
Yes.
But if that goes on long enough, you're going to have probably at some point, the critical person get bigger and start to say something hurtful, and the avoidant person just maybe shut down, be quiet. And at that point, we're just going to kind of, we might intervene at that point. In the beginning, we want to see what's going on. But we're going to kind of start to slow it down and try to help them reflect what we're seeing.
Yeah. So we've talked about all these different presentations and attachment styles and what these interactions might look like. So how does EFT help these folks? How does emotionally focused therapy help? Yeah,
the big question. Yeah. EFT is great because it focuses on what's happening in the room. Mm-hmm. And what happens sometimes, though, is we need to start in the past. We need to start their history to say, well, how did we get here? What does your cycle look like? Paint me a picture, all that great therapist lingo. Mm-hmm. But also what happens as they're talking about these things, mm-hmm. as they're talking about their hurt, or as they walked in from the waiting room and recounting the fight they just had on the way to the office or last week or whatever it is. They're talking past in the past, but mm-hmm. they're talking about it presently. So EFT is going to focus on what's happening for them. We're going to look at how the critical partner raises their voice or changes their tone or gestures or becomes critical in their language. We're going to look at how the avoidant person starts to, get smaller or pull away or push back or roll their eyes or do something like that. We're going to be looking for those nonverbal and verbal cues. And then we're going to start to, what we say, slow it down is to say, hey, I'm just going to spend some time with each of you right now. I'm going to help understand what's going on. And there, EFT is going to focus on validating what's happening on the surface. Of course, you're so frustrated. You want so badly to connect. And it must feel terrible when you don't connect. And so trying to go for that deeper feeling, that loss of connection, that you want this thing that's not happening, so this is how you show it. Yeah. And then to the avoidant person, this is just right where you feel you can't get it right. And so of course you move away back to connection or back to safety. And you still want to connect, but it doesn't feel like you can. Yeah. Validate why they're moving away. Yeah. So once we spend enough time validating, people can say, yes, that's exactly what's happening for me. And they feel seen and understood. This is the most important thing I think with EFT is as a therapist, we're helping each person feel seen and understood. Yeah. So what also is cool about that is the partner can watch us do something differently. Yeah. And that can change their perspective and saying, oh gosh, I didn't know they were so scared. Oh, I didn't know they were so, hurt. Mm-hmm. Wow. It seems like he's really seeing what's going on. And we hope to have that happen, but that takes a lot of time. Yeah. But so once we get to a more vulnerable thing, we're going to ask the person to pass it to each other and say, can you turn to your partner and say, when I get critical, I'm just so scared of losing you.
So asking for what they need in a way that makes sense to their partner.
Absolutely.
instead of feeling criticized or
Yeah.
abandoned. Yeah.
And what that does is by sharing this more vulnerable, deep thing,
Yeah.
is it creates a more long-lasting connection.
Mm-hmm.
The other person has to be receptive to it, though.
Yeah.
Both people have to be like primed and ready
Yes.
for vulnerability.
Yes.
So you can't be in vulnerability when your nervous system is too activated.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be what we call flooding.
Mm-hmm.
And you just can't have a productive conversation. And I normalize that. I say, you're not going to get anything done at this point. It's impossible. Nobody can do this. That it's just impossible. So we have to help you de-escalate and get to this more vulnerable place. Yeah. And then once you do share this and the person can receive it and say, oh my God, you can have this new experience of being with someone's deep vulnerability. And that feels validating. It soothes that attachment fear of I'm never going to be seen or I'm not good enough to, I finally feel seen. I finally feel understood in this moment. And then we just let people be in that. Yeah. It's a lot of letting people be in their feelings. It's a lot of helping people know they're not alone in their feelings. If their partner can't understand them, ways the therapist can. Yeah. And it's a lot of keeping kind of some structure. They're kind of, we're asking them to pass the ball, but we're like, okay, don't bring up another ball to start making your partner juggle.
Yes.
Keep one ball in the ring here, because people are going to love to bring up the past and history.
So managing the session to keep it productive.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's great because it works well for, I think, most people. You know, a lot of couples we see. It's, of course, there's certain caveats if there's, you know, abuse going on actively. Right. It's not
couples
safe.
therapy is all types of couples therapy is contraindicated if there is violence or abuse in the relationship.
Not safe. So EFT needs safety to work. Yeah. Like all therapy needs safety and trust. So it works great because it looks at people as emotional beings, and that's pretty much everybody.
So regardless of your identity, your relationship structure, EFT can help you break the negative cycle.
Absolutely.
And that's something, I think is really important to talk to partners, is that it's them against the negative cycle. So they're not really against each other. They've gotten into this pattern of conflict with each other that is harmful, and it's not meeting their needs. And so we're trying to break the cycle and help them create a new pattern of a connection where they can actually have their needs met. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that of having them team up against the cycle, because that unifies them. So just to kind of summarize before we close today, what are the main goals of EFT? If somebody's interested in EFT, what are we going to help them do? Yeah, we're going to help them first and foremost de-escalate. Get rid of the intensity of the conflict, minimize it, help them normalize that the cycle will happen. It will continue to happen, but by de-escalating, understanding your cycles, your moods, your emotions, the deeper emotions, you can help slow it down and name when it happens. So usually in that stage, we're spending, and that sometimes can take 6 months. It can take years. Sometimes a lot of EFT stays in stage 1 a long time, that de-escalating stage, because it recognizes that the cycle will pop up again. But once a couple is able to name what's happening for them, name what they're doing, why they're doing it, and then what they see their partner doing and why they're doing that. That's the hardest part sometimes is, oh, I get you're attacking me because you feel scared. Yeah. That's really hard to get to. Then we can move on to this kind of changing interaction patterns, replacing it with a more positive, what we call a cycle. So that might look like, instead of me, I feel like I'm getting angry, and when I get angry, I start to attack you, and I see that pushes you away. I don't want to do that. I think I want to take a deep breath. I know I'm getting flooded. I want to try this again with you. An avoidant person might look like, I'm getting scared. I'm going to pull away. I know it makes you feel abandoned. Let me take a deep breath and, try to engage with you differently. Yeah. So once you have people doing that, it's pretty much just like consolidating those, normalizing that, highlighting how much growth they've made. And they're pretty much at that point, this is why I love this model so much. It's like, once they're able to do that, they're kind of good to go at that they have some new strategies that they can work with. They've broken the negative cycle of conflict, and they can move forward in a way that they can have a deeper connection. We call that consolidation. Where they're putting all the good work to use, and that's where we're going. I mean, really the goal is to go for long lasting positive change. Is once they're able to get to that stage in the process, they're able to tackle most problems, not everything, because there's always caveats. I think there's certain things, if two people are diametrically opposed on their goals in life, EFT can be great in expressing that, helping them access the deeper emotions. But it also can help them really, if they are, couples, because we always say this is our goal is, either help the person connect, or maybe it's time to split up. It happens.
in EFT, if people are really going to split up, they can say, well, this is what I'm really feeling, and it can be this deep connect. It can still be connecting, and they can separate in a really loving, connecting way. And I've had some amazing, experiences with couples where they get to a point where they realize the relationship is past. They don't want to be together anymore for whatever reasons, but they're able to create space together and live in this really loving, beautiful way. And it's not contentious. It's not hurtful. They're hurt, but they're not like vengeful or resentful or out to get the other person.
Because they can get to the deeper emotions.
Exactly.
Well, Aiden, this has been such a great conversation today. And EFT is such, emotionally focused therapy is such a big topic, as is attachment styles. So we are going to create a lot more content moving forward. I want to thank everyone for listening to Holding Ground today. And in our next episode, we are going to talk about how attachment styles impact your dating life and answer some really big questions like why people ghost or what to do if someone is texting you excessively. So stay tuned for next time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Holding Ground. For more tips and resources on mental health, visit anchorlighttherapy.com or follow us on socials at Anchorlight Therapy. This podcast is for the purpose of education only and is not a replacement for mental health treatment. We suggest you seek out the support of a trained professional for help with your specific situation. Stay tuned for more upcoming episodes.